Hey guys, super excited for this episode. It's a special episode with a dear friend and mentor of mine, Dr. David Fowler. If you've met this man, you know he's a wizard in basically anything he can talk about. He's been in practice 24 years and is also leading the world's first, that we know of, Gonstead residency program. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into, is chiropractic recession-proof? We're going to get into how do we teach in an age of noise? What is it like to build a practice in a media age? And how do you elicit behavior change with your patients and also when you're teaching doctors in a place where it seems like life is happening so fast and so heavy and technology almost seems against us in our learning faculties? How do we actually wield this to build a practice, fortify our mind, and that way we can serve our patients at a high level? And so with that, we'll get into the episode. Dr. David Fowler.
Good to see you.
Why don't you give a brief rundown on, well, one, we want to hear an intro about you, and then tell us what you've been working on over the last few months, few years.
So I guess I would jump back just a couple years around, I guess it was like last year or so. I stepped down from being president of the Gonstead Clinical Studies Society. There was some stuff going on, health stuff, just kind of cut everything out, wasn't doing much. And then I had a conversation with Dr. Ian from Australia, and he was the one that brought up the point, and he said, I think we're not teaching people how to do this technique correctly. Because he said, and that's on us, that's not on them. And so he was like, so we need to, he said, so are you seeing this over there? And I said, yes. And he said, so we need to think about how we teach this and what we can do differently to really make sure it's sinking in, because we're responsible for these young ones to make sure that they're learning correctly. And that really got me thinking. And it was around that same time that I had an opportunity to basically start a residency program. That was the vision, was start a residency program. And so it's very unique because if you come and do the residency program, unlike seminars, you don't pay, you get paid. So you get hired on, you get paid to be here. We train you for 10 weeks. The training is done by myself and by Dr. Wood. We use a lot of his material. And right now our class has just 4 people in it. So you can imagine that's a lot of hands-on time interacting with myself and Dr. Wood, where we're really working and taking responsibility for them. And so we're in week 8 of the 10 weeks right now. And then these guys are just starting to transition into seeing patients and practicing. And as they make that transition for the next 6 months to a year, we're still going to kind of hold their hand. We'll be there beside them to help them to go over cases. That's what I did right before I left today. Is I was going through each one of them with cases that they had, coming up with a game plan for what they want to do with this patient and why they want to do it, and just walking through all that thought process that when you start on practice on your own, there's nobody to help you through it. And so they're kind of getting that with Dr. Wood and I. And so the idea is to build them up. And then as they get through the program, we start another office for them. They go into that office and they now become the doctor in that office. As we do more programs and get more people out, one of our graduates will then come and work with them, kind of as a second doctor to take some of the pressure off. And as that doctor gets up to experience, then they'll get their own office, and we do it again and again and again. It becomes very repeatable. So the more offices we have, the more often we can do a class and the more people we can take in the class, so that we are just turning out, hopefully, high-level Gonstead doctors and doing it regularly. Because one of the topics that came up is, if you go to seminars, you're only learning so much. And I think for me, when I graduated school, I'd been to 13 seminars and I'd been to Mount Horeb 3 times. And the only thing I really got out of it was passion. I didn't really develop any skills. I had a passion, I had direction, I knew what I wanted to do, I knew how I wanted to do it. I didn't have a clue how to actually get it done. And so seminars serve a purpose, they serve a role. They're like having the appetizer. And you need the appetizer to know that you want to eat more of this food. But there's a time when you got to sit down and take on that giant steak. And so that's basically what the residency has become. While we were doing the numbers on it, they work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's 40 hours per week. In 10 weeks, they've got 400 hours of Gonstead training that you cannot duplicate that in school or anything else. And so, like I said, they're in week 8. They're getting close to that 300, 400 hour mark. And the amazing thing is, the very first week, I said, do you guys think you improved? They all agreed. They're like, I think we doubled our skills in 1 week. And I think they did too. That was my take, is they did too. And it all started with, we're going to, I told them, I said, I'm going to break down everything you do and we're going to build it from the ground up. And I said, and don't be too upset about that because probably around week 10, I'm going to tear it all down again. And I'm going to build it again. And I told him, I said, that's part of the process is that as you develop more skill, we've got to tear it down and build it up because we're going to build it better every time because you now have more to put into it. So as we go through that process and do that, they just keep getting better and better and better. So it's really, there's a huge learning curve for me. I've learned a ton about what they learn, what they don't learn, how best to do this. And so we're also going through a learning curve of figuring out how to perfect this system.
And what you're doing is actually really brilliant because I was taught an old model. They talked about the M's. So they talked about mindset. They talked about mentorship, and then they talked about mastermind. Like mastermind being like a collection of people with the same purpose all around you, sharpening you. And in a way, you've created a container with all of those things because you've actually said, hey, I'm going to help you. I'm going to teach you how to think. I'm going to teach you how to use a system. I'm going to be a mentor for you. And then I'm also, you're going to be around people that are just collectively a little bit in pain while you guys start to learn this process and realize like, hey, this is the process to sharpen you to be a world-class doctor. Because 400 hours, we know it's not going to be the end all, but that's a huge leg up relative of what people normally get in the seminars, especially because every time at least speaking from my experience, every time I went to a seminar or a workshop, I would go right back into school and it seemed like it would just erase everything that I took on because your visual, and motor learning gets corrupted by what you see in front of your eyes. But if you're all you are is around this and you're obsessed and you're immersed in this experience, that has to change you.
Yeah. What I've noticed is that with these guys, there's been no backsliding. There's no 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's just constant, steady improvement. At the very worst, you see a plateau, but that happens if you weightlift. You're still doing the work and you see that plateau, but then usually after a plateau, there's a huge increase. That's exactly what happens. They go up, they kind of plateau for maybe a few days or a week. Then all of a sudden there's a huge increase and the skills get better again. And when I had these guys about 6 weeks in and they're getting successful ilium pull moves and they're doing other stuff that I was like, my goodness, I worked for years to get this done. And you guys are already pulling them off. So it's that part's been good. It's like they don't have any of that wasted time and no regaining ground you already had that you lost.
That's incredible. That's huge. I think more people need to be a part of that program. So I'm excited to watch you develop it.
Yeah, there's definitely there's openings for people if they want them. Just contact Intero Chiropractic. That's who we're doing it through. And we just keep adding offices as we need them for people. So we're planning on starting another class in April. And if we keep on that course, we'll probably do 3 or 4 classes this year. So
that's incredible. There's such a need. Have you noticed that? I think since the rise of media, there have been more people in the last 2 years that have sought me out asking specifically for the Gonstead name than there has been in the last 9. So have you noticed that more now with media, or is the mindset of the population changing? Like they're demanding more, so they're actually asking more questions?
Yeah, I don't know if it starts with a fascination because what we do is just a little bit different. And so maybe they're fascinated by seeing that we use x-rays, or maybe they're fascinated by the scope, or maybe they're fascinated by a seated cervical. They don't really understand the depth of what it means to adjust somebody consistent with biomechanics. But I think that once that intrigue brings them in and then they feel the difference, they recognize it's a different kind of adjustment. That even happens sometimes. So what I do in addition to teaching all those guys is I see some of the more difficult cases. So my day is like nothing but difficult case after difficult case after difficult case. And it's pretty exhausting. But I notice even with some of them, I had one today I adjusted and the comment was, how come you were able to do that when nobody else was? And I said, because yours is really, really hard. Like yours put me to the test to get it done. And sometimes that's it. But then when you just feel that you got adjusted and your body didn't fight it and your body welcomed it, it's a feel that you don't forget. So that anytime anything happens that's, I guess, more assaulting on your nervous system, something that feels more like it's forced, your body just goes, nope, that wasn't it. And you don't ever forget it. So I think that there's something to that once people see that, and then the other side is results. Where people go wherever they get results. If they get results somewhere, they're not going anywhere else. They don't even have to know why it worked or anything else like that. They just know that when I had this problem, this fixed it. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. It becomes undeniable when it's experiential like that, because people are so used to, I don't know, Band-Aid care. It seems like they just kind of go somewhere, whether it's physical therapy or chiropractic or pill for every ill model Western. It's like they're just kind of used to good enough. And then I've noticed when people start experiencing something that's a resolving or dissolving of what they actually had, they usually become the best patients, even if they were the big skeptics at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the one thing you can't deny is experience. You can tell people they don't know what they think they know and things like that. You can never tell them they didn't experience what they know they experienced. And so the experience does its own self. And so that's why when I was a student, we were always taught that the adjustment sells itself. That's what they always said. You don't have to be a salesman. The adjustment sells itself. A good adjustment sells itself. If your adjustment is less than that, then you're probably going to have to sell it because now it has competition. But the Ritz-Carlton doesn't compete with Kmart and places like that. They don't compete with Motel 6. They're not fighting those guys because what they have sells itself. Or let's think about this with Disneyland. Disneyland doesn't have to offer discounts and beg people to come in. they have to figure out how to handle all the people that come, because when people have that experience, I don't know of any place. I grew up going to Disneyland all the time. I know the experience and I love that experience. I don't know anywhere else to get that experience. So if I want that experience, there's only one way to get it. And that's kind of how it becomes with Gonstead, that this is what we do. And once you've had that experience, it is the experience. But I think that there's definitely things you can do around the adjustment that either add to it or take away from it in the way that you deliver that portion.
Yeah, there's a model that I've been teaching the students lately, and you just reminded me of it. There's levels of service, and the bottom of it being like a commodity. Like the only competition is the price. It's like gas. And then the next one would be a product. So, I mean, imagine a book. If I'm going to buy a hardback book, range is about $20 to $30. I'm not going to pay $90 for a book that I could probably find the information for free on YouTube, or somebody else probably wrote about the same thing. There's nothing that new under the sun at this age. And then the next one would be a service. The next one would be an experience. And then the top one would be a transformation. So, and when I hear you say the experience in adjustment, that's profound, in my mind, that's transformational. So when people experience that transformational, you can set a price to it. It doesn't really matter what the economy is doing or anything. Like nothing can take away from that transformational experience because they are fundamentally different. And that kind of segues into the next thing that I wanted to talk about that I feel like would be helpful, at least for students, is there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy right now. And I have questions over and over again. Do I start my own practice? Do I associate? Do I rent a room? Do I start small and then grow big? Is chiropractic actually recession proof? And what does it look like to actually build a practice right now? Because I mean, in a way, you're kind of doing it again, as well am I. I'm constantly doing it, but
yeah. I think that chiropractic is recession proof when you're good. When you can get results, the economy doesn't matter, because there will always be sick people. They will always be looking for help. As long as you don't take advantage of them money-wise, they'll come in. You can get them better. You'll always have people who are looking for that and needing that. So in that regard, whether it's recession or good times or bad times, almost don't matter. We just keep plugging along, doing what we do. I found in my practice, I practiced in the same place for 20 years. I actually, during those 20 years, could not tell you when the times were good and when the times were bad. Because for me, it was just day after day after day. Nothing went up or down. It just grew as the business grew. The outside environment had no effect on it. But I also know that when you first start in practice, that is very realistically the very worst you're ever going to be. And so then you go, well, how well can I convince people to let me help them when I'm the worst version of myself that I'll ever be? And then how quickly you get good just depends on your commitment to practice and improve and do what you do to get there, and your attentiveness to the patients you see, to know if what you're doing is making a difference, good or bad, so that you're making little tweaks. That's what we try to teach them in the residency, is to be mindful of the results. Don't be afraid of a patient not getting better. If they don't get better, be mindful of that, figure out why, and use that as a learning experience so that you get better and better at getting them good faster and faster. But when you're afraid of the patient coming in and telling you, oh, you have that last adjustment, I was much worse. If you take that personally and you're afraid of that and you don't want to hear that, then you've just shut yourself off to learning. And once you stop learning, you stop improving. And I think if I look at the whole of God State community, the people that I see who aren't really getting to the levels they would like to get to are people who stopped learning, probably because they stopped listening, stopped taking criticism, stopped taking correction, probably long ago. Some of them never took it to begin with. And so because of that, they lost the opportunity to grow. Whereas even now, if a patient says they're worse, good. That's information. That helps me to refine what I'm doing and make corrections. It's like thinking that an athlete has never made a mistake in a game. Of course they have. The opposition is trying to make them make a mistake. So then when they make a mistake, they learn from the mistake so they don't repeat the mistake, and they get better and better at not making the mistake. That is the true process. And so if you take that process and you use it to improve yourself, then it really won't matter much if it's good times or bad times. Now, on the flip side, I've been looking for a while at some real estate. When you're trying to figure out, do I open an office? Do I rent? Do I buy? How much space do I need? Things like that. There's a part of me that says there's no time to start like the present. However, I also don't want to buy in at the top of the market and put myself in a bad spot. And so when I see a trend coming, I go, well, I'm just going to hold for a little while and see if it'll dip a little bit, because I want to put any new practice in its best possible starting position. And so typically that means financially, you want to make sure that you're in a position where you could borrow the least, have the most, give yourself the advantages. The problem when you're first starting is that you don't actually know what you need. So what tends to happen is that people buy a lot of things that they don't need, which are usually too expensive, and they don't buy enough of the things that they absolutely need, which are probably less expensive, but they just don't perceive the value in it. So you start getting things with bells and whistles, or you buy the best x-ray machine you can instead of buying the one that'll get the job done. And then you skimp on your tables. And it's like, okay, you've got a first-class x-ray machine, and the x-rays only look a little bit better. You could have gotten that information for less. And then you bought cheap tables where you're now giving uncomfortable adjustments because the tables have no cushioning, or they don't have all. It's those kind of decisions that put people in a bad spot where they don't really, they think that they've done well, or you at certain points you let your ego come in and you go, well, this office is a representation of me to the public. I want them to think highly of me, so I'm going to do all of these little things. And you do things that aren't maybe necessary just because you're worried about that. And again, I go back to the fact that the adjustment sells itself. And in the end, and I've seen people do it, you can have a dumpy little office that's nothing special, but if you're given first-class adjustments, people will show up. And you can have a super fancy office, and if it's not getting the job done, it's going to be a ghost town. So it's really about making the right decisions, and it always comes back to technique. No, actually, it comes back to your knowledge base and your skill set. So every day forward is about growing what you know and improving what you can do. And they feed into each other. As you know more, you can do more. As you can do more, you start to know more. So I'm sure you've seen that. As you try to feed your brain, you're like, wow, all of a sudden I'm making better adjustments. And then you learn to make better adjustments, and you're like, oh, now that makes sense to me. That never made sense before. Now I know more. And it just kind of feeds itself in a loop, and it keeps it going.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with everything you said. And I think there's a weird dance that you do in the beginning because you're trying to essentially buy confidence, thinking that it replaces certainty. And the only way to get certainty is literally to fail enough times to gain enough skills to know what works and what doesn't work, whether it's through vocalization or the application of an adjustment or interpreting an x-ray. So you only get certainty that way, which people try to manufacture confidence and overlay it on certainty, whether it's getting the fancy things or having the bigger office or over leveraging whatever it is to try to create a facade around them because they don't feel certain in what they're providing, as opposed to, let me just do the hard things, let me suck for a while, acknowledging that, again, this is probably the worst that I'm ever going to be. knowing that I will have this little dip before the parabolic jump, because as my certainty goes up, I think it's directly correlated with the amount of people you can help, the amount of money you can make.
Yeah. There seems to be a magic point where you need to be able to trust your skills. So I don't need to trust your skills because I'm not relying on them. You are. So you need to know what you can do, what you can't do, how far you can push it. So when you get a complicated patient or you get something that's a little more detailed, you know, here's my limit. As long as it's within my limit, I have confidence that even if I don't feel like I know the answer, as I start moving forward, the body just kind of falls in place. It's like you get that with sports where you're playing a position and you just go, I don't know that I know what I'm doing, but as soon as the ball starts moving and the play starts, my body just starts going, like it instinctively knows. And that happens in chiropractic, where I don't know that I know. I just have confidence that when I see the x-ray and I see the scope and I feel the palpation, then something in my brain will kick in and my body will just start going, and I'm almost along for the ride. And when you have that confidence in it, then there's really nothing to worry about. The patients come in and you just go for the ride. When you don't have that confidence, your number one goal in life is you've got to get that confidence, which means you can't have confidence in your ability unless you intimately know your ability, which means you've got to figure out, where's my failure point? I need to know with great specificity, where's my failure point? Pick anything, a C7. So I'm going to do a C7 seated. Well, where's my failure point? Do I fail on the contacts? Do I fail on the thrust? Do I fail on the stabilization? How often do I fail? Where am I not comfortable? When it hurts my hand, where does it hurt my hand? That should give me a clue as to what I might be doing wrong. And you become aware of the weakness, as aware of the weakness as you possibly can. And then through that process, it improves. And then there does come a point one day where you just realize that somehow I've got it and it's going to be okay. That I will figure it out and I will get it done. And then once you get past that point, I'm sure you can attest to this, work becomes less stressful because you don't get up in the morning being like, oh no, what am I going to see today? How bad is this going to be? Instead, you get up and you're like, this is fun. We're going to go help some people. We're going to make some people better. And we're going to see some miracles and it's going to be awesome. And it's fun to go do it. It's a totally different mindset.
I remember being so envious of that, even several years into practice. It's just how relaxed the seasoned doctors seem to be and how uneasy I seem to be all the time. And it always like, and it wasn't even about like, of course you have the normal business stresses of like, oh, I got to make enough money to pay my bills and hopefully have enough to eat. It's like that stuff comes in, but it's more like it's a one-to-one interaction. It's almost like showing up to a boxing match, realizing that you haven't trained a single day and you don't even know how to throw a punch. But
this isn't.
So you're like, well, this isn't going to go well, and so you just have this internal conflict where you're like, I'm asking for money, I'm trying to run a business, but I'm not even that good yet, and so there's just this disconnect. Almost, I guess this would be a good way to start talking about like imposter syndrome, but it's, you know where you want to go, but there's an obvious bridge and where you are, like whether it's a logical bridge or a creative bridge that you need to solve through art or through actual skill acquisition. How do people bridge that and start to look at this pseudo identity crisis of you're a doctor, but you're not the doctor you want to be? And how do you start to marry those two people so you become that doctor where I'm effortless in practice, things just feel fun, I wake up excited, and even the hardest patients, I know that I'm going to be able to get them better because I'm expecting a miracle, and almost putting the positive pressure on yourself of like, if I don't get them better, nobody will, so I better just relax and figure it out. Like that's my mindset. You might be able to say something a little bit adjacent to that.
That gives me a flashback to my first year or two in practice. And I think your first crisis of consciousness or conscience is when you say to yourself, how am I going to sell this person on the idea that I can help them when I'm not sold on the idea that I can help them? And it starts to come through in what you do. And so that became a challenge because I had this like really honest conversation with myself of I can't become something that I'm not. And so I remember being in the room with patients and thinking to myself, I'd be spending way too much time palpating as though I was looking for some hidden clue that I was hoping I would magically discover. And I would ask myself, if you were given 24 hours to keep palpating this patient, are you going to know any more than you know right now? Well, no. Then just move on, move forward. And so maybe it was just the sports background. I said to myself, when all else fails, go back to fundamentals. And so that whole idea of I'm going to help them some way that I can was, do I know which vertebra it is? I do. Do I know where it's sitting relative to where it should be? I do. Can I push it in the direction it should go? I can. Can I do it my preferred way? Maybe not. Do I have other ways? I do. So just do that, because at least pushing it the way it needs to go is going to turn out much better than just whacking on it and trying to make noise out of it. That doesn't help people at all. That's of no benefit to people. So I just was like, it might be small and it might be pathetic, but just start trying to move it in the way it needs to go. And just magically, somehow, it starts moving better and better and more reliably, and the results get better. And I can't tell you how many times I had a patient where I did something like that, and I wasn't even sure I felt anything. And then the patient came back and told me how much better they were. And I was like, well, maybe I'm better at this than I thought I was, but I'm still pretty sure I'm not very good at it. But just knowing that those fundamental things are right, if you know those fundamental things are right, then that's going to guide you in the direction of what you need to do to get the positive benefit by doing that. So in the end, don't overcomplicate it. Don't start that downward spiral where you're lecturing yourself and pointing to yourself all the things you don't know. And there's always things we don't know. There's times now I have a patient and I'm like, well, I'm only about 80% sure this is the right thing to do, but all I can do is do it to the best of my ability. And if they get better, then it's the right thing. And if they get worse, then okay, they got worse. Now I can start to use that to refine and get to a better spot and figure out what's really happening. Because most of the time with the patients I see here who are more complicated, all that really means is that they've got more things going on and their body's done a better job of hiding it. It's really that simple. So I just have to figure out what all is going on, what's most likely at the root of it all, and where is it when their body's really trying to hide it well. And so being a little bit better at being able to find what the body's hiding is really, for the most part, the difference maker. And then maybe the fact that I have the ability to make the same adjustment in 3 or 4 different ways where the residents can do it in 1, maybe 2 ways. That gives me a few more tools. So that's really the only difference.
No, it's you can't disregard the process of like stacking evidence in your favor. Like you need to prove it to yourself over and over again, but it's the negative talk. Like you said, it's like, I can either ride this momentum of thought in the positive way. Like I know enough to be effective and maybe not get it 100% done, but I'm okay with that because I'm moving in the right direction. Or I can ride the train the opposite way, which also has momentum of self-doubt and basically pollution and dissolution and disease, like of the doctor. And that's what I just seem to notice over and over again with these top-heavy overthinkers, where they just can't get past some voice in their head saying they don't know enough.
Yeah.
It's just very interesting.
Yeah, I think that probably is where the imposter syndrome comes from. People feel like they're inadequate or not good enough. And the thing is, you're never going to be 100% perfect. So if that's the goal, then you could do this for 50, 60, 70 years. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to get every one of the same first try. And I think about professional athletes get paid millions of dollars to what they do. None of them are successful 100% of the time. Baseball players strike out all the time. Basketball players miss shots all the time. Football players drop passes all the time. And nobody goes, well, that guy's terrible. He still gets his paycheck. He's still considered he still goes up in the Hall of Fame, like all that stuff. And it's like, so we're not going to be perfect. You can't set up that as a goal. But, you know, it still happened. I had a patient today. It was a T1, and I was adjusting and seated, and I took 2 shots at it, and I missed it. And I was like almost shocked. I was like, seriously? I can't get this to move? Like, it was really annoying to me. And then I thought to myself, wait a second. I got more ways to do it than this. So I realized that it's not about me and my skill. It wasn't that I can't do it. It's that that's not the way that bone needed to move. It needed a different environment. It needed a different kind of stabilization. It needed a different angle of attack, one that I can't create in a seated position. So I laid the person down I did a prone, and the thing set deep, super deep. And it was like, that's what the bone needed. So I think to get out of that imposter syndrome, don't take it personally. Don't be like, I didn't get it done. I wasn't able to move it. When you can't move a bone, think to yourself, maybe that's not how that bone needs to move. That this isn't the right line of correction. I can't create the right angle in this position. The patient can't relax the way they need to. A million different things. But what I need to do is just find a different position where I can work with their body to get it to do more naturally what it needs to do. And then it'll happen a little bit better. And so then it's not personal. I didn't fail. I just found a way that it wasn't willing to move before I found a way that it was.
You nailed it. It's taking everything hyper personal, especially in the beginning. It's because it's such a new skill that you love to take blame for everything. Like it didn't work because of me. It's my fault. I suck or whatever. Well, like, yeah, you suck, but I mean, there's more than one way to do it. And that's probably just the way that it didn't want to be set. It might just, whether it's a swelling pattern or their anatomy, or we don't know. I mean, the body is so, I don't know, amazing in its way, in its ability to compensate. But in the beginning, when you have no certainty and no confidence, you just make it all about yourself, as opposed to saying, hey, this is actually an exchange. Like there's an exchange of energy that's actually happening. Like their anatomy is telling me something. I have to be able to respond to it. And then their anatomy has to respond to my response. But then they just implode on themselves. Because I mean, think about the normal personality of doctors. They're nerds. Like they go for that external validation. They're all just little 15-year-olds trying to hyper excel at something. And speaking from experience, but if we can take that over personalization out of it and just say, not this way or not this time, or come back tomorrow, we can set it a different way, or ice that thing that didn't set the way I wanted it to. Like there's almost like a humbling of yourself and realizing that it's way bigger than you. That's what I've noticed, at least in my process, that I try to teach as well.
I've noticed a change in all of my years of being alive. That when I was a kid, people just wanted to be good at something. Then it went from, I don't just want to be good at something, I want to be the best at something. And then it's not good enough to just be the best and beat everybody else. I need to utterly annihilate and destroy everybody else. And the best is the one who like blows away second place. And so you just keep adding all this pressure that you got to be better and better and better. And the reality is, if you're destroying people by that much, it's probably not that you're that good. It's probably just that they're that bad. So you probably have the wrong target. And so if you're really in a room, like I think about this when I go to seminars and some of the friends that I have, and I think to myself, I don't know who's the best. I don't know who's the worst, but I know that we're all pretty close to each other in skill level. So it kind of doesn't matter. It's actually more that we're all unique, but there's no best and no worst. That's such a weird mindset that we want to, in almost everything, we end up talking about who's the best and who's the worst. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you see this with athletes all the time. The greatest of all time. I remember it was only like, I don't know, probably 10 years ago that I first heard that term, the GOAT. And I was like, the GOAT. To me, the GOAT is like the guy who's terrible. I tell you, the GOAT. And I'd never heard that term before, because prior to that point, nobody talked about that. Nobody talked about the greatest of all time. We could look at, say, football and all these quarterbacks that played at the same time, from Joe Montana to Dan Marino to John Elway to all these people, Jim Kelly, and you appreciated them for their uniqueness and what they brought to the game. It wasn't a competition of which one was the greatest of all time. Nobody cared. And so, and who could say anyway, because they each did something different. And so it was just a different mentality of, it was less about being the best, and it was more about finding your uniqueness. What do you do well? How do you bring out your best attributes to be the best version of yourself you can be? Because that was my goal coming out of school, was I don't know if I'm the best at anything. I just want to be the best that I can be, whatever that is. Use my previous experiences, use my skills, my, I don't know, God-given abilities, whatever they may be, put them all together and just be the best version of myself that I could be. Not because I'm on some competition to be the best, but because I felt a deep responsibility to help all my patients. And my worst fear was having a patient come to me and I couldn't help them. Like, to me, that's the worst. I don't want to have a patient I can't help. So I want to be prepared to help anything that walks in my door, because I want to help them all. And so that was the motivation. It wasn't about chest pounding and I got to be the best. It was about, I got to help as many people as I can, because they're all looking for help. And like I said before, if I can't help them, who can? I don't know of anybody else who's going to do it. So now they're left living with this the rest of their life. That's not right. I need to be better. So the drive to be better was to help the patient, not to blow up some ego, not to create. I mean, it's funny to me. I got my first cell phone when I was already a doctor. So the idea of social media is just profoundly strange. Like, that was never a motivation for anything. If you were known outside your local community, you'd probably done something pretty good back then. So it's just different.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm brought back to, I think it was my first or second year in practice. And my personality type, I never did any health fairs. I never did spinal screenings. It just always felt weird to me. But I was asked to come do this health fair. Got to do it for free. This was like a paid thing for the normal businesses that were around. But they said, hey, you're a friend of the business. We just want you to come hang out and you see a bunch of the employees. So there'll be 500 people here, multiple businesses. It's like, great. And I go and I show up to this thing, put a spine on the table, put my cards out, and I just sit down. Like, I didn't stand in front of the table. I didn't try to field any patients over. I didn't do anything. And people just kept coming up to me and talking to me. But then this other chiropractor comes up to me and he introduces himself and he looks at my card and sees I'm a chiropractor, and he shakes my hand and he goes, "Don't worry, there's enough for both of us." And I was kind of put off a little bit at first, and because I really didn't know what he was insinuating, but I think he was coming at it from the place, at least from my perception now, of like, we don't need to compete. There's enough. Like, we don't need to be enemies. And it was almost astounding to me, because I'm like, one, what I do doesn't even come close to what you do. I'm not worried. And then, but it also, as I've gotten further along, at least I think it's a little less ego, where there's no such thing as competition. Your uniqueness is actually what people are going to be drawn to. So you don't really need to be the best. The best on what metric? Like the best on, I don't know, fanciest office, or the most plants in your office, or the best seated cervical. Like, who cares? It's, does somebody go into your office and leave uplifted? Because what some people feel upliftment from certain things, or feel connected with certain things, or feel better from certain things, and not from me. And that's okay. But the idea that there's competition, you have to place yourself aggressively in the market or be the best, is almost, it comes back to that too self-deluded thing, where we take everything so personal. We must elevate ourselves to be the best of some sort to compete at all, as opposed to, let me just be in my uniqueness, my zone of genius, just being myself. But not a lot of people stay long enough in that space of analyzing who they are, where their faults are, what they need to double down on, in order for them to just embrace the uniqueness that they are, to be the magnet for growing an office.
Yeah, really what sells you is your uniqueness. It's funny that we live in a generation where everybody's becoming homogenized. There's like this ideal version, and everybody wants to be in that, rather than realizing, well, why don't you stand out and be outside of that? And that actually makes, and you do that by being authentic to who you are and just being yourself, whatever you do. Like, for me, it was kind of funny having the podcast and doing the 1505 Club came naturally, because I'm always reading books. I'm always looking through literature. I would do that no matter what. I just do that. And so then I had all this stuff on the top of my head. So somebody bring up a topic and I'm like, oh yeah, I could talk about that because I've been reading it, and like, that's just what I do. And so it was like, well, embrace what you do rather than necessarily hide it or think that, well, that's not what people do. I need to be more of like, I don't know, I got to put on a show. I think that's a lot of it, is we think we got to put on a show. And I've gotten to where, even with patients, I don't put on a show. That's not my personality. I'm an introvert. I'm not super gregarious. I just kind of talk slowly and calmly. And then a lot of times I start showing them their x-ray, and I just start explaining them to them. The reason why you have this symptom is because of this. And I show it to them. They go, oh, that makes sense. Okay, now we're locking in. It's making sense out of it. So that's kind of, it's just embrace the uniqueness of who you are, and don't try to be who you think everybody's supposed to be. You don't have to mix in with that, or you don't have to, whoever you think is doing better than you, you don't have to be like them. Just be you, and let your personality come out. And there will be people who are attracted to that and get better from it. And then the skills are just the skills. You just develop them. They're the same for everybody.
Yeah. And I guess this is a good segue as well. How do you, we're in an age of noise, an age of media. How are you noticing, at least for your clinic, like, how are you guys building a practice in this culture now? Like, where people are, one, a little afraid of their uniqueness. Like they want to be homogenized almost, which is not polarizing. But how do you step into that uniqueness? What makes people a magnet to actually grow a practice practically, tactically, or otherwise?
I think still word of mouth is your best advertisement, and word of mouth comes from getting results. To any person who has a problem, that problem is huge to them, even if it may not be huge on your scale. So helping people with any problem, from the biggest problem to the smallest problem. I've helped people with like simple torticollis, which is not life-threatening in any means, but it's life debilitating. And you help them with a torticollis, and they're telling everybody. And next thing, you got 5 people coming to the office going, I talked to so-and-so, they think I got torticollis. And it's just what happens when you start fixing stuff. And so that's why having the knowledge base, which is what we're trying to teach here, where you can quickly assess and go, okay, you've got this problem, comes from this source. I can verify that multiple ways. I have certainty that that's the problem right there. I also have certainty that I can fix it. So I give the adjustment moves. I feel how your body responds. I send you home. You come back 2 days later and you're 90% better. Voila. That person's going to tell somebody. Somebody knows that person. Somebody knows that person's moving better now. It's no more complicated than that.
And just because I know students are going to ask, like, how do you ask for referrals? Do you even ask for referrals? Are the results that profound where they just go tell everybody? Or is there internal and external comms that you do? Like, what is your process? Just so other people.
I don't say this bragging in any way. In fact, it's probably the opposite of bragging. It's probably my giant weakness. I've never asked for a referral in my life. It's just not something I would ever do. It's just not me. So, and I think if I did, a patient would be like, what's up with you? You feel funny today? Like, what are you asking for referrals? Are you desperate? Do you need money? Like, they would start asking me questions, because that's just not me. I know that it's just, you just fix people, and people generally want to help other people that they know and care about. So when you help them and they now think they have a solution, they genuinely want to help the other people in their family who have similar problems or like problems. And so it's just a natural offshoot. So I've never had to do much of that. It's very odd to me, this whole culture of, I need reviews. I need online reviews. And I'm like, that's so weird. Like, we never had that. There were no reviews. Nobody could say anything good or bad about us. It just didn't exist. And I kind of like the world where it didn't exist, but now it does exist. And so I guess when that's all you've ever known, you can't imagine a world without it. And you think, well, all I have to do is screw up one time and everybody's going to be blasting me and it's all over from there. And I don't think that's really true. The stats we've known forever is that people aren't really going to complain about you if they don't like you. They have to not like you. They're not usually going to pick on you because you were a little slow at getting them better, or maybe gave them an adjustment that didn't feel the best, or didn't do as much as they thought you should. They might complain to you, but they're not going to go rag on it to everybody else. But if they don't like you, and if you're kind of a jerk, then people will do it even if you do a good job. So to me, it's not something you really worry about that much. We just worry about doing the best we can and let the results take care of themselves. And I think all falls after.
Yeah. I love hearing that, because I see it all over social media. It's like, here are the 7 ways to get more leads, or here's the one ad campaign you need to generate X, or this is how you get all these Google reviews. It doesn't need to be this huge, sexy, complicated thing. Like, if you even just listen to the conversation, we said, be yourself, get your skills right so you don't suck that much. Don't overthink it, and just be good to people. Like, it can be that simple. It can be simple, clean, just enough. And that's a motto that I've brought on in my practice. Let it be simple, let it be clean, let it be just enough, because anything else just ends up being messy. Anything else is trying to be something that you're not. Like, be simple, be direct, be clean, like, get the job done, and just enough. Don't try to oversell it or be anything you're not. And with that, like, I see, you get reviews, you get the testimonials if you want those, you get the referrals without even really having to ask. And you could, but you don't it's not a need. People think it's this need that I'm going to live and die on me asking and kind of begging, as opposed to just be so obsessed with your work and be so obsessed with doing a good job that it will just grow naturally.
Yeah. Going back to that first year or two, it's okay to be a first-year doctor. There's nothing wrong with that. We all had to be one at some point. It's okay to be a first-year doctor, but you're going to do better at it if you embrace it and don't try to resist it. So the way that I embraced it is, if people asked me a question, I didn't know the answer, I told them I don't know. There was nothing wrong. Most of them told me, I said, I've never heard a doctor say I don't know before. And I said, well, there's a lot we don't know because there's a lot they don't cover in school. But I'm like, but it's a good question, and I want to know the answer as much as you do. So I will find the answer. I'll let you know. And then the most important part was I actually followed up with it, which is probably how I got to be the way that I am, where I'm always reading stuff, because that's basically how I did it. Somebody would ask me a question, I'd be like, I want to understand this better. So I go read, and I'd look through all this stuff, and I'd look through the literature, and I'd look through basic textbooks, and I would try to get a solid understanding so that I could give them an answer that was useful to them. And people said, wow, you not only did you say I don't know, but then you went and found out, and then you remembered to actually tell me. So to me, that was my version of myself as a first-year doctor. I did that probably more frequently than I'd like to admit, because there was a lot I didn't know. But through the process of not knowing and then going and finding out, I learned, until one day, there was a day when I didn't have nearly as much that I didn't know. People asked me questions, and I went, oh, I actually know the answer because somebody else already asked me that question, and I had to look up the answer. So here's what I know. And so all of a sudden I did know the answer. But to me, there's nothing wrong being a first-year doctor, but you just better, it's going to be better if you own the fact that you're a first-year doctor and you're still in the process of gaining knowledge and learning. And people are actually generally okay with that. They don't begrudge that. The only thing they're really not going to like is if your skills are so bad that the adjustment hurts. But what we've found is, as long as you're knowing what you need to be doing and you're adjusting in the line of correction and you're doing everything right, you can miss and it doesn't hurt. It's only if you're violating biomechanics that it's going to hurt. And so very rarely I can't think of the last time I adjusted anybody and they were like, oh, that hurt. Like, that was a very long time ago. Even though I might miss, it doesn't hurt because it's in the right direction. It just wasn't complete. So that's not something to fear either. You just have to make sure your skills are good and then embrace it and go learn.
What would be 2 or 3 things that you would tell your first and second year self as far as confidence, personal image, like your self-image, like what needed to develop? Because you've obviously built a lot of discipline and a lot of practical knowledge and also soft skills as well through these years of practicing and now teaching. Like, what are those things that you would impart on that person that would be stepping into that first year?
I actually thought about this a lot because I have a very clear image in my head of the adjusting room that I had. I had an office in the back that I would go sit in and be like, what am I going to do with this patient? I had all that stuff. And I realized when I think about it, and I think about the thoughts that went through my head at that point in time, I would just tell myself, you're making it way too complicated. That the solution is actually not to make it more complicated, make it simpler. That all we have to do is find the subluxation, which sounds like, well, isn't that harder than it seems? Well, kind of, but it's not. And so one of the mistakes I made when I was young is I would stare at the x-rays thinking that the subluxation was going to jump out at me. But that was a mistake because all I was looking at was misalignment. And we talked about this today. We do training for several hours every Tuesday with all of our doctors. They don't see patients. We just train them all. And so this was training day. And so we talked about that one of the big mistakes chiropractors make, and especially gostic doctors make, is they fall into a trap where they adjust misalignments, not subluxations. And if you don't know the difference, then that's why you fall into that trap because you have to know the difference, a misalignment. And so I gave them a test, and one of the questions they answered that they were looking for posteriority. And I was like, no, you're not looking for posteriority. You're looking for subluxation. Now, does the subluxation have posteriority? Yes. But is it going to be the most posterior vertebra on the fill? Not necessarily. So don't just adjust what's most posterior. That's a misalignment. That's not a subluxation. So what I would tell myself, if I could go back, is stop staring at that stupid x-ray and put your hands on the patient and feel, because that's where you're going to find the subluxation, is on the patient with your hands. When you feel how they respond, you feel how things move, and then you're going to use the x-ray as a roadmap to guide you there, not to figure out where you want to go. That, to me, that's one of the biggest ones that I got wrong. I would also just think we make a mistake of trying to perceptually add value to the visit by doing more. And what we often end up doing is giving less value by doing more. And so it's like, I got to adjust this ilium. Oh, that was a terrible adjustment. Well, I'll just do L5 too. Oh, that was a terrible adjustment. I better do T6 too. I got to get something to move and make noise so they feel like they got something that they're paying for. And the more you're doing, the worse the situations get. And it's like, no, just do that ilium. And if you didn't get it, find a different way to do it. But just keep doing it until you get something out of it. And then that'll start getting better, and do less, not more. But it's such a culture of more is better, more is more valuable. So if I want to add value to the visit, I need to do more. And I think that's how we end up doing modalities. And we end up doing all these other things because we just want to keep adding more so we get more value, not realizing that in chiropractic, often the best value you can give is to do less and just do the one thing really, really well. And that's when you get the best result.
I love that. Well, this has been awesome. Maybe like one last question for a graduating student. Would you open a practice, or would you associate if you could do it all over again?
That's hard. Because the reason it's hard is you can get totally taken advantage of both ways. So there is no clear cut. Like, you think to yourself, this is the safe path. I don't think either of those paths is safe. I know people, I know somebody, I won't say his name, but I know somebody who he decided to associate because he thought it was safe. I gave him warning signs of what the doctor might try to do if they were going to take advantage of him. I didn't hear from him for a while, and then he called me up and told me that the doctor did exactly what I told them they were going to do. He ignored the red flags. They did it all, and now they had him doing all the work. They were taking all the patients, all the money. He's doing all the work. He's making nothing. So he's like, so I decided to open my own practice. Okay, great. And so we talked through the process of what he needed to look for, where he needed to go. He decided to jump over a town, but he was nervous. He wasn't sure he had the skills. So we talked through, I said, so what skill do you think you don't have? What's lacking? So we talked about some patients he had helped. He had skills. He knew how to do it, watched through the whole thing, and he ended up going out and doing his own thing. And he recognized that doing his own thing wasn't really any less risky than working for the associateship. The only difference was he was in control. And I was like, it's not about being a control freak. It's that if I'm in a race car with a race car driver, I might feel out of control, but I'm okay because he knows what he's doing. If I'm racing down the freeway with a goofball that's not a race car driver, then I'm like, I'm going to die. Now it's risky. And that's sometimes how you feel. If you're working in an office and the owner is just a crazy person who's just pedal to the metal all the time, you're actually in a very risky position. Whereas if you're in your own office, you can kind of control the environment so that you don't take all that risk and you don't push too fast. The problem is if you're not well motivated, you might go too slow. And so driving on the freeway 30 miles an hour under the speed limit is just as dangerous as driving 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. And so that's where you run into problems on your own, is that on your own, you might be inclined to go too slow and get yourself in trouble. In somebody else's office, they might push you too fast and get you in trouble. And so I think you just have to know yourself and know, can I push myself at the speed limit and not go too slow? If I can, being on my own might be a good deal. If I need somebody to drive me because my tendency is to be way too easy on myself, way too slow, you might need to be in that associateship where somebody can push you a little bit, at least for a while, until you learn how to do it on your own. And so I think really what it comes down to is understanding the difference between the two options and knowing which one you personally need to go where you go. That's why, again, this residency is very unique because you're in an office with us and we will push you. And then once we get you going, we put you in an office and we back off rapidly and we see, can you sustain it on your own? So you do have the freedom. You're in an office doing your own thing. We're there to help you if you need help, but we're also not looking over your shoulder driving you either. So it's kind of that transition. I think it's kind of the best of both worlds because we recognize that people kind of need both. And so unfortunately, it's the only place I know where we can do this. There's not a lot of other opportunities to do that, but I don't know. If I started to practice on my own right out of school, and not because I wanted to. I didn't feel like I had any options. There was no associateships to take. So I felt like, well, I just got to do this. And so I tried to take as small loan as possible, built as small an office as I could that allowed me to do everything, but did it right, had all the Gaussian equipment, had my x-ray room, had my dark room, had all the bare bones, and then just started seeing patients. And 1 week after I opened was September 11th. And I remember walking out onto I was on a main road. I looked out, I looked to the right, I looked to the left, and there were no cars to be seen. And I was like, did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? And these people are never going to leave their house again. But a week later, people started coming out of their houses. They kind of stopped being so shell-shocked. And slowly it started to build. And I got a few patients. And as I helped those patients, they brought in more. And it was just slow, steady growth, which many times the growth happens at the rate at which you can handle. But if your skills are so low, that rate might be too slow to pay the bills. So maybe you don't want to be on your own. So I know there are probably people who want to be on their own, but they really need to be an associate. And there are people who want to be an associate, and they really need to be on their own. So it's not really about what you want. It's like really figuring out, what do you need? What's the next step of growth for you? And so really when it comes to that, I think every person's individual. I have talked to everybody individually about where do you need to go? And so if you know yourself, then you can figure out what do you need to keep yourself growing. Because I feel like I can even see at 20 years how I've continued to grow over 20 years. And I'm sure I like to look at the 5-year landmarks. So I think with 25 years coming up, I'll get to 25, looking back at 20 and see if that was more growth in some way. The whole career is just growing. So everything you do is about finding the next phase for you personally and where you need to grow. And so getting good at doing that early on is just going to guarantee you keep getting better longer and longer, because what I find is the people in the end who are the best doctors are the ones who never stop learning. So people who know me know that I think Denny O'Hara is awesome. When I talk to Denny O'Hara, I'm always amazed that here's a guy who's done it for so long, and yet he's still reading books, and he does it constantly. He's not just like back there scooting along going, oh, this is so easy, I've got it all figured out. He's still trying to figure it out. So to me, that just set a standard of that's what we do. You learn until you die. So I think that's the mindset to get.
Yeah, I love that answer. I mean, when we stop learning, we start dying. We're either green and growing toward that vision, or we're ripe and rotting away. Again, I think you hit it on the head. It's people coming out of practice, maybe they just lack self-awareness, or they don't have a vision for where they really want to go. And so they'll either opt into what feels more comfortable, or maybe they'll just say, like, I'm a bad employee, I'm going to open up myself, I don't want to have anybody to tell me what to do, not really acknowledging where they are in the skill set, which start it with conviction, and also start it with the end in mind. I always try to start things with the end in mind. Like, where would I actually want this to go in an ideal? And then I can actually have something to work toward, which I think a lot of people are just like, I need a job, or I need to make money, or I want to accumulate skill. I don't want to be alone. Like, they come at it from almost like a scarcity fear mindset, as opposed to, I need to learn. I need to grow, whether I'm on my own or with somebody. Only I know what I'm going to thrive in. And I don't think they make a lot of time for that. And I think an invitation for young doctors would be, or young students becoming doctors would be, take time to get to know yourself, be honest with yourself, figure out how would your life be in an ideal, like where would you want to live? Where do you want to practice? I mean, those two things are going to be the most important things. And then how would you vacation? What do you want your house to look like? What kind of car do you want to drive? How many patients do you want to see a day? Me personally, I don't want to see 100 patients a day. I know doctors that do it all the time, but that sounds exhausting. I'm good with 30, 35, 40. I've done the whole 50, 60, 70. It's not for me, but for some people, they thrive on that. They build more energy by the end of the day. And so it's having that knowing of how do you want to be from day to day? Because this literally becomes your life. You're never really off.
Mm-hmm. To me, when I started, there was a subtle difference. I think if your mentality is, I want to be on my own because I don't want anybody telling me what to do, that might not be the right mentality. And yet the subtle switch for me is I didn't want anybody corrupting my technique, telling me what to do that would corrupt my technique because they wanted to make me like them instead of letting me be the best I could be. And yet if the right person would have offered me an associateship, I would have taken it. But because they weren't offering me an associateship, I wasn't willing to take a lesser one, thinking that they might corrupt the whole thing. And I thought, well, if that's the case, I think I can guide myself better, so I should be on my own. And it really actually wasn't what I wanted to do, which is kind of how I knew it was the right thing to do, that it was going to be a huge growth step that I needed to take, but it wasn't what I wanted, but it was probably what I needed. So I think you can need it on either side of that. And then like you were saying with numbers, I saw 12 patients today, which sounds like nothing, but they were 12 of the hardest patients ever because all the cases are complicated. And so I got done seeing 12 patients and I was like, I need a nap. I'm exhausted. So that happens. So I think that's part of it too, is how many patients you see does depend on what kind of patients you're seeing. If you're just seeing run of the mill, oh, I've got a little bit of low back pain, but it's no big deal patients, you can see 100 of those all day long. If you're seeing people who have like bowel issues, haven't gone to the bathroom in a week, you're seeing that kind of stuff. Well, that's a whole different story. You're not going to see 100 of those in a day. And if you do, you're not going to handle it well. Nobody will. That person doesn't exist. So but fortunately, it's not all or nothing. It's a combination of the two, except in my case where they're all like that. And so in that case, I don't want to see 100 of them. I don't even want to see 20 of them. I was pretty good with 12. But I looked at my schedule. I was like, 12? That's so many. So it's just how perspective changes. Because, yeah, I've seen 15, 16 a day, but it just depends on what you're seeing. And so that's the other thing is when you start out, you're going to generally see easier cases, things that are a little more simple, like the low back pains and stuff like that. Get good at those cases. Don't despise that. Get good at fixing a pelvis. Get good at fixing an L5. Get good at fixing a thoracic that's causing somebody rib pain around the side. It might seem easy, but get good at those. And then as you get good at those, the more complicated ones come in, and you'll grow as you go, and you'll learn how to deal with some of that stuff, dizziness, bowel issues, hormone issues, that kind of stuff. And it just slowly grows into that. So don't despise the days of small things, like the simple stuff.
I love that. And then I guess wrap up, final question. What do you think your purpose is right now in this season?
That's an interesting one. I'm not totally sure. So I definitely enjoy doing this kind of teaching. I enjoy building a foundation for young doctors and having them develop that confidence, to see them develop confidence in their skills and know that they can go help people. To me, that's awesome. I love doing that. There's also a side of me, though, that goes, man, I'd love to just have my own office, disappear, be very quiet, just live in my own little bubble, and just see a ton of patients and help them all. So I go between those worlds. I do the 1505 Club podcast, and there's sometimes when I'm like, I want to just like disappear for a little while and then maybe come back. Like I go through that, but then I'm like, I know people learning from it. And as I'm learning, I'm trying to pass it along. So there's a value to it. So sometimes what I do is I just kind of slow down the production schedule. And then maybe I kick it back up again if I have a bunch to share. And so I've just kind of let that kind of guide itself instead of me forcing it at all, because I guess I go between these two personality extremes of, let me get out there and help as many people as I can, and then let me disappear and just go help patients. And they're both good. I like both of them. I think that's the problem, is I like both of them. It's hard to do both at the same time. And so I've been thinking about this a lot too, is when you're younger, don't be too obsessed with trying to teach people too early. That to me is a huge mistake, because when you're teaching people, you have a huge responsibility. And so maybe that's what stresses me out with these doctors, is that they are my responsibility, and they know what I've taught them, and they don't know what I haven't taught them. And if I teach them something wrong, it could take them years, if ever, to unlearn what I taught them incorrectly. And so I take teaching as a huge responsibility to not mess that up. And if I would have started teaching before I really had it clear in my own mind, there's no telling what kind of damage I could have done. I've seen people do that kind of damage, because I've seen plenty of people who are like, well, I've been out of school for about 60 minutes now, seems like I should be teaching somebody by now. And off they run to go teach somebody something. Or I actually can think of somebody that I know, that everybody would know their name, who never wasn't teaching. So even as a student was trying to teach people, and they went straight into teaching and never went through the actual learning phase. And so so you see these people, you're like, always the teacher, never the student. Well, a non-student doesn't make a good teacher. You've got to be, it's kind of like the whole leadership thing. I was actually going to do a podcast on this topic. You have to be a good follower before you can be a good leader. People think that following and leading are opposites. So a natural born leader must naturally be a bad follower. Well, that's not true. You've got to be a good follower. And if you wouldn't want them on your team as a follower, why in the world would you want to be on their team and have them as a leader? That's a terrible idea. And yet that seems to be how we see it, that if they're a natural leader, then we follow them. And if they're a natural follower, then they should follow us. But people shouldn't transfer back and forth. Well, same kind of deal with this, with teaching and learning. A good student makes a good teacher. If you've never been a good student, you probably won't be a very good teacher. So that's the reason why I tell everybody, if you think you ever want to teach anybody anything, be a student first. Learn the thing before you try to teach it. So that's my advice about teaching. Because to me, I actually find it to be stressful. And maybe that's why I want to run away from it once in a while, is that it's constant stress, because I take it so heavily that I've got to be teaching these people and teaching them correctly and making sure that what they're producing is the right thing. It's not some low stress environment for me. So that's how I see it. So what is my purpose? I don't know. For right now, it's teaching some people and helping some people. And I don't know. I'll figure it out when I grow up. I guess.
Well, this has been awesome. I'm super excited for what you guys are building over there. I think there's a dire need. I think the evolution of healthcare starts with how we teach doctors. And I mean, I'm a product of your teaching, and I'm not saying I'm all that great, but I'm very appreciative of the skills that I learned from you. So if anyone's in good hands, like, they're in very, very good hands being in yours. So I'm excited for what you have to build over there. And let's get this message out to get you more students, and we'll definitely have you on again soon.
Well, and I knew from the beginning you and Nick would do fine, because what you guys had, and this is what we look for in all students, is you showed up. you both showed up and you were interested. And for most students, that's where it starts. If you just have an interest and you just show up and start walking, you'll find yourself far enough down the road that now you couldn't go down any other road. It kind of leads you on its own. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Doc. We'll definitely have you on again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.